Welcome back. Now, Usen Obot's works have been shown locally and internationally, both in solo and group exhibitions. His works are complex and yet playful, which in some instances he decorates with a signature blend of raffia, adire and tie-dye fabrics. In his new body of work, Mkpese Karma, the present into the future, he imagines parts of Africa that fused its governance, cultural, historical, spiritual and political practices through visual reinterpretations. He joins us now in studio this morning to share a bit more on his body of work. Mr. Obot, a very good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, sir.
It's an absolute pleasure. Now, before we get into the exhibition, just give us a bit of background into how you started in the creative space.
Well, I actually attended art school and then did a couple of internships. And then when I moved to South Africa, opened a studio. I started, as an artist, you need a studio to practice or to produce work.
Okay.
Then along the line, I moved into the gallery space and opened an art gallery in Port Elizabeth. And then ran that for about 8 years. And I just felt it is time for me to go back in studio and get back in studio to produce this current body of work.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of work do you produce?
Well, my work straddles between sculpture and painting. So what I've done is to blur the line. And particularly my choice of medium for now, for example, which is wood, leather, and fabric, is to reference the culture that I have taken my inspiration from, which I believe as progenitors, we hold in place history that we need to fast forward or hold in place and then transfer to the next generation. That's why you see the present into the future.
And now this body of work, Mkpese Karma, what's that about? I hope I've pronounced it correctly.
Yeah, I think you're close.
What's the correct pronunciation?
Mkpese.
Mkpese.
Mkpese. Mkpese simply is an Ibibio word that translates into English to say it's something magical, something you cannot really put a finger on, something that we'll call an enigma in a sense. Then the karma is basically this real course in the sense that we, as human beings, we take with us histories that our grandfathers, our forefathers, lived with. This is embedded in us, which has to go forward, which will continue, just like life, into the next, generation.
What language is that?
Ibibio, Ibibio Efik.
Ibibio Efik.
You find that on the south coast of Nigeria.
Ah, I see, I see. So tell me, what story does this exhibition tell? I mean, there is a story behind it, I'm sure.
Now, back then, this is the thing. I think we haven't told a lot of stories. We haven't drawn into African history like we should. As Africans, we have not even told, I think, 1% of our story. So this work is drawn from a part of that history, because there was a system in Africa, in the Ibibio culture that was used to administer the community before the advent of European culture, and this was, like you had rightly said earlier, it fused politics, religion, spirituality, and everything in one. And this was, if you investigate, it was a system of democracy. So we now had pushed that one and then adopted the Western system of democracy. Because in that culture, every single family was nominated to be part of the council.
Okay.
Then every single male, once you're born as a male child, you are now initiated into the Ekbo society. So the work draws from the Ekbo society. So if you check, the word is spelled E-K-P-O, Ekbo society. So it was used as a system of the military. You can't be a king without using the Ekbo society to administer, to run. Okay. It's like being a president and you have your cabinet, your senate. It was the same thing. So the work draws from there. And my choice of wood simply also references the materials back then, which was wood. This is why we don't get to understand why we see a lot of African masks. Those masks were not ceremonial. They were heavily integrated into the culture, which spirituality and everything was, included. So this work, the wood, references the mask, the wood that was used back then. It is not the similar thing. And the color that also brought upon that is that on some of these masks, you will see some, paintings, which, there were ethnic colors from maybe plants, the soil, or wherever they can get colors from.
And why the choice of wood? Because you mentioned wood, you mentioned fabric, and just transcending from wood to fabric, would you say that your creative juices are flowing the same when it comes to working on both these?
You see, as an artist, sometimes you want to experiment. Okay. But then again, when you go back again into African culture, we had our own sort of choice of clothes and designs and patterns. And in this narrative, there were languages. I mean, those things, those inscriptions, for example, or the motifs are not just motifs. There were things being said or stories being told in you know, sort of in a way. So I try to bring all of that in, whereby to basically hold in store. Maybe in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it's going to be relevant or like a reference point also for, you know, for our children.
Mr. Obot, what would you say that this body of work has taught you about the whole principle of governance, cultural, and even political practices?
I think for me, it is that we Africans are going to struggle a bit until we find ourselves. What I mean by we find ourselves is we find a system of governance that works for us, not the one that we think will work for us and then we imbibe it and then we use it. So, like what I lived in the Eastern Cape, so there had been a culture there, I mean the Xhosa tradition, even the Zulu tradition, that if we go back into history, they use that to run the community effectively. Yes. So I think if we, let's say we're moving with the times, we have to like combine what we learned from somewhere and then put it together with what used to work for us and then use it. I think certain countries have done it, like China. Yes. Which, I mean, you can see how far they've come. They retain their culture and everything, but yet again, they're in the same space with the countries in the West.
Right, right. Mr. Obot, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Good stuff. Well, we just spoke to visual artist Usen Obot on his work and the latest exhibition, Mkpese Karma, the present into the future.